Hi guys, tonight we are stepping quietly into a winter night in the Old West, where the sky's already dark by the time you arrive, and the cold has settled in like something alive. You feel it immediately. It presses against your face, creeps into your sleeves, and reminds you that sleep here is not about comfort. It is about making it through until morning. You probably will not survive this if you treat it like a cozy camping trip. That is the unspoken truth everyone here already knows. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now dim the lights and let yourself ease into this long night. You stand still for a moment, breathing carefully. The air smells like smoke, dry wood, and something animal. Snow crunches faintly underfoot even if you try to move slowly. Sound travels differently in cold weather. Every step feels louder than it should. Somewhere nearby a door creaks. A horse shifts its weight. Then silence returns wide and heavy. Winter in the Old West did not announce itself with drama. It arrived gradually, then refused to leave. One well-known historical reality is that many frontier winters lasted far longer than newcomers expected, stretching from early autumn frosts into late spring thaws. People who arrived too late in the season often learn this lesson the hard way. Sleep became the dividing line between those who adapted and those who did not. You realize quickly that nightfall changes priorities. During the day you worry about work, travel and supplies. At night the question narrows. Where do you put your body so it does not lose heat faster than you can make it? That question follows you inside whatever shelter you have managed to claim. Maybe it is a log cabin. Maybe it is a dugout carved into a hillside. Maybe it is nothing more than a wagon with canvas stretched tight and hope doing the rest. You step inside and the temperature barely improves. This surprises you at first. Modern instincts tell you that indoors equals warm. Here indoors mostly means out of the wind. That alone can mean the difference between sleeping and shivering until dawn. People at the time understood this intuitively, even if they did not use modern language to explain heat loss. There is a small fire burning, or at least the memory of one. Ash glows faintly. Smoke clings to the rafters. The scent stays in your clothes and hair. It will stay there for months. A quirky detail that shows up in old diaries is how often people describe the smell of winter homes rather than their appearance. Smoke-damp wool, unwashed bodies, and animal hides blended into a single scent that meant survival. You move closer to the fire pit, not because it is especially warm, but because it feels safer. Fire is light. Fire is movement. Fire tells you that someone was awake recently and cared enough to keep it alive. Outside the darkness presses against the walls. Wind finds gaps you did not know existed. It hums, then whistles, then goes quiet again. Each pause feels louder than the noise. As you prepare for sleep, you understand something important. Sleeping here is not an ending to the day. It is an active process. You will adjust, you will wake, you will listen. People did not expect to sleep through the night the way many do now. Broken sleep was normal. Waking to feed the fire or check a door latch was simply part of staying alive. There is a common belief that frontier people were tougher and therefore slept easily in harsh conditions. Historians still argue whether this toughness was innate or learned out of necessity. What is clear is that no one arrived knowing how to do this. The land taught them night after night. You lower yourself onto whatever passes for bedding. It might be a rough wooden platform. It might be packed earth. It might be the floor itself. There is no mattress as you would recognize it. Comfort comes later, if at all. First comes insulation. You feel for blankets, hides, spare coats. You do not smooth them out. You pile them. Gaps are dangerous. As you settle, your body begins to notice the cold more sharply. This always happens when you stop moving. Muscles cool quickly. Fingers stiffen. Your breath clouds the air in front of your face. You learn to breathe slowly through your nose, warming the air before it reaches your lungs. People who slept through winters like this learned small tricks that never made it into official records. Outside, the night stretches on. Coyotes might call in the distance. Or maybe it's just the wind playing tricks on your tired mind. Sound carries far in cold air, and loneliness has a way of amplifying everything. You remind yourself where you are. You remind yourself that others nearby are doing the same thing, lying still listening, waiting for sleep to come in pieces. This first night teaches you humility. No amount of confidence changes the temperature. No amount of optimism seals a drafty wall. What matters is attention. You listen to your body. You notice where cold creeps in first. Feet, neck, lower back. These details matter. Tomorrow you will adjust. Tonight you learn. You close your eyes, not expecting rest to come quickly. Sleep here is light and cautious. It floats near the surface, ready to retreat if the fire pops or the wind shifts. This is how winter begins to reshape you quietly without asking permission. You do not conquer the night. You negotiate with it. You wake not because you are rested, but because your body insists on movement. Cold seeps in during stillness, and lying too long feels like sinking. You shift carefully, testing stiff joints, listening for the soft collapse of ash in the fire pit. The shelter around you reveals itself slowly in the half-light, not as a home, but as a choice you made, perhaps hurriedly, perhaps with more thought than you realized at the time. Out here, shelter comes before comfort. That lesson settles in quickly. You may have dreamed of a solid log cabin, smoke curling neatly from a chimney, but winter rarely waits for ideal plans. Many people in the Old West slept their first winters in whatever structure could be raised fastest. A widely accepted historical reality is that thousands of settlers and workers spent entire winters in temporary shelters, not because they preferred them, but because there was no time or labour to build better ones before the cold arrived. You stand and feel the difference immediately. The air inside is calmer than outside, even if it is not much warmer. That stillness matters. Wind strips heat faster than temperature alone. This is why even a poorly built wall can feel like a blessing. You press a hand against the interior surface. Wood feels cold, but earth feels different. It holds the day longer. That realization explains why so many people turn to the ground itself for shelter. Dugouts appear unimpressive at first glance. Half-buried, sometimes barely visible from a distance, they look like mistakes rather than homes. Yet you learn their value quickly. Earth insulates in a way timber cannot. Temperatures inside change slowly. Nights feel less violent. There is a reason dugouts spread across the plains during the late 19th century, especially where trees were scarce. They were not symbols of poverty alone. They were practical answers to a brutal climate. You crouch near the entrance and notice how low ceilings trap warmth. Smoke lingers, yes, but heat does too. People accepted the trade-off. Eyes watered, lungs burned. Still, it was better than freezing. A small but telling tidbit from Frontier Letters describes families choosing smoke over cold, even letting chimneys clog slightly in winter to slow airflow. Fire safety mattered less when survival itself was uncertain. Cabins offered different problems. Log walls shifted as wood dried and shrank. Gaps appeared overnight. You stuffed them with rags, moss, mud, anything that might slow the wind. The work never truly ended. Each cold snap revealed a new weakness. Cabins also creaked and popped. As temperatures dropped, sounds that could startle you awake until you learned to recognize them as harmless. Then there were wagons, canvas stretched tight boards, rattling wheels acting like anchors against drifting snow. Sleeping in a wagon during winter was not ideal, but many did it anyway, especially migrants caught mid-journey. You lay diagonally to fit. You curled inward. You learned which side faced the wind. The shelter moved slightly in gusts, reminding you constantly that it was temporary. Some scholars continue to debate whether settlers underestimated winter or knowingly took risks due to economic pressure and limited options. Letters suggest both. People understood the danger yet pressed on because stopping felt worse. Land claims' wages and pride pushed them forward into seasons they were not ready to meet. You begin to see shelter as something dynamic rather than fixed. It is adjusted nightly. Blankets are hung to block drafts. Doors are reinforced. Snow is piled against walls as insulation. Even animals become part of the structure, tied close enough that their body heat warms shared walls. As you prepare to lie down again, you realize that choosing shelter is not a single decision. It is a series of small judgments made repeatedly, often in the dark, often while tired. This awareness follows you as you settle. Knowing tomorrow night may demand something different again. By the third night, you stop thinking of the cabin as a solid object. It feels more like a living thing, expanding and tightening as the temperature shifts. You lie still and listen to it breathe. Wood clicks softly. A beam gives a slow, tired groan. These sounds are not warnings, they are information. You learn which noises mean nothing, and which ones require you to open your eyes and check the fire. Log cabins in the Old West were rarely as snug as paintings suggest. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that most frontier cabins were built quickly with unseasoned logs that shrank dramatically as they dried. This meant that even a well-made cabin could become drafty within months. You feel those drafts, now thin ribbons of cold slipping through seams at ankle height or brushing the back of your neck. You adjust without fully waking. This is another skill people developed. You pull a blanket higher. You rotate your body slightly so your feet face the warmer part of the room. You tuck fabric into gaps along the wall. Each small movement conserves heat. Each unnecessary one wastes it. The floor beneath you is hard, sometimes just packed earth. If there are boards, they are rough and uneven. Cold creeps upward from below, reminding you that gravity favors heat loss. You learn to place something beneath you before worrying about what goes on top. Hide spare coats, even folded sacks become insulation. People who skipped this step often complained more about cold than hunger. A curious detail from personal journals describes how some settlers slept with their heads close to the fire rather than their feet, reversing modern instinct. The logic was simple. Feet could be rubbed and warmed in the morning. A frozen face made breathing painful all night. This small adaptation rarely appears in official histories, yet it speaks volumes about lived experience. You notice the smell again. Smoke never quite leaves. It settles into wood, cloth and skin. At first it feels unpleasant, but over time it becomes reassuring. Smoke means fire. Fire means life. Some nights when the wind shifts just right, smoke seeps low and thick, forcing you to cough softly. You cover your mouth and wait it out, choosing discomfort over letting precious heat escape through an open door. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how much time frontier families actually spent awake at night tending fires. Some argue that sleep was heavily fragmented, while others suggest people learned to bank fires well enough to rest for longer stretches. Lying here half aware, you suspect the truth sits somewhere in between. You sleep when you can. You wake when you must. Outside, the wind changes pitch. It finds a new gap and whistles briefly before moving on. The cabin answers with a creak, then settles again. Snow taps lightly against the wall, a sound so soft it almost feels imagined. These noises fade into the background as your mind learns which ones matter. You think briefly of the people who built this place, their hands, their urgency. Cabins were rarely built for beauty. They were built to hold back just enough cold to survive the season. Perfection was a luxury for later years, if later years ever came. As your breathing slows, you feel yourself drifting into that shallow frontier sleep. It is not deep or uninterrupted. It comes in waves. You float, surface adjust, then sink again. This rhythm becomes familiar. It is how the cabin and your body learn to cooperate. By now, you understand that sleeping in a cabin during a brutal winter is less about walls and more about awareness. You rest not because you are comfortable, but because you have learned how to stay just warm enough. The cabin does not protect you completely. It buys you time, and for tonight that is enough. By the time you encounter a dugout, your expectations of shelter have already changed. You no longer look for something impressive. You look for something that holds warmth and gives the wind fewer ways inside. The dugout does not announce itself. It sits low, pressed into the earth, sometimes marked only by a rough door and a thin line of smoke that blends with the sky. You step down into it carefully. The ground slopes inward and the air feels different almost immediately. Not warm exactly, but steadier. The temperature does not swing as wildly as it does above ground. This is the quiet advantage of soil. It absorbs the day and releases it slowly. People who learned this early tended to survive winters that broke others. Accounts from the plains consistently note how dugouts became common where trees were scarce. Timber meant hauling time and labour. Earth was already there. You dig into a hillside or cut straight down, then reinforce with sod poles or whatever scrap lumber you could spare. The result is dark, cramped, and deeply practical. Inside light is limited. Firelight reflects softly off dirt walls, creating shadows that barely move. Sound behaves differently too. Wind noise fades. Outside, storms feel distant, muffled. Snow piles against the roof, adding another layer of insulation. You realize that what looks primitive is actually well suited to this environment. You lower yourself onto bedding laid directly on the ground. Here you are closer to the earth, and that closeness brings both comfort and discomfort. Dampness is a constant concern. Moisture steals heat faster than dry air ever could. You lay hides or straw, carefully checking for wet spots before committing your weight. People who ignored this often woke colder than when they lay down. One small but revealing observation found in homestead letters describes how families rearrange sleeping positions depending on soil conditions. If the ground grew too cold near an exterior wall, everyone shifted inward, sometimes inch by inch over weeks. Sleep here was flexible. Nothing stayed fixed for long. Smoke collects quickly in low spaces. Your eyes sting if the fire burns too hot. You learn to keep flames low, favouring embers over blaze. This means waking occasionally to feed the fire just enough to keep it alive. The rhythm becomes familiar. Doze, wake, adjust, lie still again. There has long been disagreement among researchers about whether dugouts were healthier than cabins. Some point to increased respiratory problems from smoke and dampness. Others emphasize the reduced exposure to wind and extreme cold. Lying here breathing carefully, you understand why the debate persists. Dugouts traded one danger for another. Still, when the night deepens and the wind howls above you, the choice feels justified. The earth holds. The cold presses less aggressively. You curl inward, conserving warmth, listening to the muted sounds of winter passing overhead. The darkness inside feels heavier than in a cabin. There are fewer visual cues. This can unsettle newcomers. People accustomed to candlelit rooms often struggled at first, yet over time darkness becomes calming. Your mind stops scanning for movement. Your body relaxes slightly, knowing that fewer gaps mean fewer surprises. You notice how sound changes your sense of safety. Outside storms announce themselves loudly. Inside the dugout they whisper. This quiet helps sleep arrive more easily even if it remains light and cautious. You drift surface, then drift again, the earth steady beneath you. Some frontier families personalize dugouts in small ways. Shelves carved into walls, hooks hammered into beams. These touches did not add comfort so much as familiarity. Knowing where your things were mattered, when moving cost energy you could not spare. As you lie there, you reflect on how survival reshapes preference. What once seemed undesirable now feels sensible. You no longer crave height or views. You crave stillness. The dugout offers that, along with just enough warmth to let sleep continue its fragile hold. By morning, frost may coat the entrance. You'll climb back into a world that feels sharper and louder. But for now, tucked into the earth, you rest as well as winter allows, and that quiet rest, imperfect as it is, carries you forward another day. You come to understand canvas nights only after you have lived through one. During the day, a wagon looks sturdy enough. Wood sides feel solid under your palm. Canvas seems thick when it is dry and pulled tight. At night, everything changes. The temperature drops and the materials reveal their limits. The wagon becomes a thin shell between you and the weather. You climb inside and arrange yourself carefully. Space is limited. You lie diagonally or curl into a narrow pocket between supplies. Every object shares heat with you or steals it. Metal tools feel especially cold, so you move them away from your body. Wood crates are better. Cloth bundles are best. These small decisions shape how the night unfolds. Canvas behaves like skin. It tightens in the cold, then snaps sharply when the wind catches it. Each gust announces itself. The sound is not subtle. It flaps, rattles, and then goes still again. At first, this keeps you awake. Later it becomes background noise, a rhythm that marks time when sleep comes in fragments. Travel diaries repeatedly describe wagon sleepers waking to frost forming on the inside of the canvas. Your breath contributes to it. Moisture rises, meets cold fabric and freezes. You brush crystals away before they melt and dampen your blankets. Dryness matters more than warmth here. A slightly colder but dry bed is safer than a warm wet one. You notice how wind direction becomes critical knowledge. Before settling, you check which way the wagon faces. One side always bears the brunt. You position your head away from it, feet toward it, trusting that boots can handle more cold than your lungs. This calculation becomes instinctive. Some people suspended extra cloth along the inside of the canvas, creating a crude second wall. Others wedged bedding between ribs of the wagon frame to block drafts. These improvisations appear often in personal accounts passed along not as clever tricks but as obvious necessities once learned. There is discussion among historians about how often wagon travellers moved during winter versus waiting out storms. Evidence suggests many tried to push on longer than was wise, driven by schedules and fear of falling behind. You feel that tension here. Lying still, listening to wind rake across the plains, you understand how tempting it would be to keep moving, even when rest is safer. Sleep comes lightly. Every sound feels close. Snow sliding off the canvas roof sounds like footsteps. A sudden gust feels like a hand shaking the wagon. Your mind runs through possibilities until exhaustion finally slows it. You remind yourself where you are. You count breaths. Panic wastes heat. Calm preserves it. Animals nearby help. Horses tied close create both sound and reassurance. Their shifting weight, their steady breathing anchors you. Some travellers positioned wagons deliberately near livestock, knowing their presence reduced the sense of isolation and offered minimal but real warmth. A lesser-known observation from letters describes people placing water containers inside bedding at night. The goal was not to keep them warm, but to prevent them from freezing solid. In doing so, the containers absorbed body heat and returned it slowly. It was not comfortable, but it worked. As the night deepens, the wagon rocks gently in the wind. The motion is subtle, almost soothing once fear fades. You drift in and out, waking to adjust blankets, to brush away frost, to listen. Sleep is never complete, but it is enough. By dawn, the canvas glows faintly with early light. The cold feels sharper now, concentrated by stillness. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, breath visible. Another night survived. Another lesson learned. Wagons are not homes, but they can be shelters when treated with respect and attention. Fire becomes your quiet partner now, not something dramatic or comforting in the way stories describe it, but something that demands constant negotiation. You approach it carefully, even when tired. Too much flame wastes fuel and fills the space with smoke. Too little, and the cold creeps back in faster than you expect. You learn that the best fires for sleep are not bright. They are low, steady, almost reluctant. You crouch close and feel the uneven warmth. One side of your body warms while the other stays chilled. This imbalance is familiar. People slept rotated slightly toward the fire, then shifted later when muscles stiffened or skin grew too hot. There is no perfect position. There is only adjustment. Period journals frequently mention how scarce fuel shaped winter nights. In many regions, especially on the plains, wood was not abundant. Dried dung, twisted grass, and even corn cobs became fuel. The fire smells different depending on what you burn. Dung smoke is sharp and clings to everything. Grass burns quickly, demanding attention. Wood is precious enough that you think twice before adding another piece. You settle back down, watching embers pulse softly. Their glow reflects off metal objects and eyes alike. Firelight shrinks the world. Beyond its reach, the shelter dissolves into shadow. This narrowing is oddly calming. You're not meant to monitor everything at once, just the fire, just your breath. Keeping a fire alive through the night is part skill, part luck. You bank coals, carefully covering them with ash to slow their burn. You have learned this from watching others, not from instruction. Knowledge here moves by observation and quiet correction. Someone coughs when smoke thickens. Someone shifts when the heat fades. These signals teach you more than words. There remains debate among scholars about how often people allowed fires to go out entirely at night. Some evidence suggests that in extreme cold fires were kept alive continuously. Other accounts imply people accepted colder nights to conserve fuel. Lying here listening to embers crack softly, you understand why practices varied. The decision depended on supplies, weather, and how much exhaustion you could tolerate. A small but striking detail from letters describes people sleeping with tools placed within arm's reach of the fire. Not for defense, but for maintenance. A poker, a stick, anything to shift coals without fully waking. This allowed minimal movement, conserving heat and energy. It is a small optimization, but one that matters over long winters. You notice how fire changes sound. Wood popping is sudden and sharp. Ash settling is barely audible. Each noise tells you something about what the fire is doing. You learn to interpret these sounds without opening your eyes. A sharp crack means a log shifting. A dull hush means embers fading. Your body responds automatically, stirring just enough to intervene. Smoke is the constant risk. Low ceilings trap it. Poor airflow keeps warmth in, but also keeps smoke lingering. You feel it in your throat before you see it. Your eyes sting. You adjust a vent or crack a door slightly, then wait for the balance to return. Cold air rushes in, briefly biting, then settles. You pull blankets tighter and let the fire do its work again. Some families arrange sleeping spaces in a rough arc around the fire, rotating positions night by night, so no one took the coldest spot repeatedly. This informal system rarely appears in official records, yet it surfaces often in oral histories and memoirs. Fairness mattered when discomfort was shared. As the night stretches on, you wake less fully each time. Movements become automatic, hand out, nudge coals, hand back. Breathing slows again. Firelight dims and brightens in cycles that match your drifting awareness. The line between waking and sleeping blurs. Outside, the wind rises, then falls away. Snow piles against walls. The fire responds subtly, drawing more air, then settling. You and it are linked now. Each depends on the other to maintain balance. By the early hours, the fire is little more than a red eye in the dark. You feel the cold creeping closer, but not enough to force you fully awake. This is the goal. Not warmth, but tolerable cold. Enough rest to function tomorrow. Enough heat to avoid harm. You let yourself sink back into shallow sleep, trusting the embers to hold a little longer. Fire is not comfort here. It is strategy. And tonight your strategy is holding. By now you have stopped thinking about bedding as something soft. Here bedding is a system. It is the difference between resting and shivering until morning. You approach it with the same attention you give the fire, knowing that mistakes show themselves quickly once the night deepens. You start from the ground up. Whatever lies beneath you matters more than what covers you. Cold rises, patiently pressing upward through soil and wood. You stack layers not for comfort but for resistance. Hides go first when you have them. They trap warmth well and block drafts. Quilts come next, thick with uneven stitching heavy enough to stay in place when you shift. Spare coats fill gaps where blankets fall short. People who live through multiple winters learn this by experience rather than instruction. Early settlers often complained in letters about sleeping cold, even when wrapped in blankets. Over time they realized the problem was not what was on top, but what lay beneath. That realization spread quietly, neighbor to neighbor, without ceremony. You notice how weight becomes useful. Heavy bedding presses down, sealing small air pockets that would otherwise steal heat. Light covers flutter and lift when you move, letting cold rush in. So you favor bulk. Beauty doesn't matter. Pattern does not matter. Only density. A small detail surfaces as you adjust the pile. Bedding is rarely spread flat. It is tucked, folded, layered unevenly. Feet receive extra attention. Shoulders too. Your midsection generates more heat and needs less insulation. This uneven distribution becomes second nature, a kind of nighttime map drawn by trial and error. Some families sewed quilts specifically for winter sleep, thicker and less decorative than those used during warmer months. These were not heirlooms meant to be displayed. They were tools. Stains and scorch marks from sparks were common. No one worried about them. Survival outweighed appearance. You pull the final layer over yourself and pause, listening. The room settles around you. The fire murmurs faintly. Outside, wind moves along the walls searching for entry. Inside, the bedding holds. This is the goal. Not warmth, but stability. There was never full agreement about which materials worked best. Some swore by buffalo hides. Others preferred multiple wool blankets. Many used whatever they had, mixing materials without much theory. Results mattered more than explanations. If something worked, it stayed. If it did not, it was replaced. You shift slightly, testing the seal. A cool thread of air touches your ankle. You respond immediately, tucking fabric tighter, adding weight. These movements become smaller over time as you learn where weaknesses tend to appear. Sleep improves not because nights get easier, but because you get better at managing them. Bedding also carries scent. Wool smells of lanolin. Hides smell faintly of animal and smoke. Quilts hold traces of food, sweat and fire. At first, these smells feel overwhelming. Later they become familiar, even comforting. They tell you that you are wrapped in what has already kept you alive. Children are buried deeper than adults. Extra layers go to the smallest bodies. Adults accept cold more readily, knowing their reserves are greater. This quiet prioritization happens without discussion. It is understood. As you settle, you feel the difference between stillness and movement. Remaining still preserves heat. Restless shifting wastes it. You remind yourself to move only when necessary. This restraint becomes easier as exhaustion grows. Sleep arrives in intervals. You drift-wake, slightly adjust, then drift again. Each cycle reinforces the system you've built. The bedding holds, the fire holds, the shelter holds. By morning, the pile around you is slightly disordered, compressed by hours of use. Yet it has done its job. You wake stiff, yes, but alive. In winter, that is the measure that matters. You lie there a moment longer, breathing slowly, appreciating the quiet success of layered fabric and practiced habit. Tonight you will rebuild it again, perhaps a little better than before. You do not undress for bed anymore. That idea feels distant now, almost naive. Here, clothing is not something you remove at night. It is part of the insulation system, as essential as blankets and fire. You sleep in what you wore all day, sometimes adding more, sometimes loosening pieces that bind too tightly. Wool scratches at your skin, but you welcome it. Wool holds warmth even when damp, which matters more than comfort. Cotton feels colder and loses heat quickly. Leather stiffens but blocks wind. You learn how each material behaves once the temperature drops. These lessons settle into your hands as you button, unbutton, tighten and loosen with practiced care. Boots stay close. Sometimes they stay on. Taking them off risks freezing them stiff by morning. Many people learned this the hard way, waking to boots that would not bend leather cracked by cold. You loosen laces slightly before sleep, giving your feet room to swell without cutting off circulation. Circulation matters more than fashion ever did. Layering follows its own logic. Too many tight layers restrict blood flow and make you colder. Too few leave gaps where heat escapes. You adjust by feel rather than counting garments. Shirt, vest, coat, maybe another shirt beneath. You stop when movement feels free but protected. People of the time often mentioned sleeping with hats pulled low over their ears. Heat escapes quickly from the head. A hat becomes bedding. Scarves wrap necks and lower faces, softening each breath before it enters your lungs. You learn not to breathe through your mouth if you can help it. Cold air burns on the way in and dries the throat painfully. You settle back down and notice how clothing shapes sleep posture. Bulky layers make rolling difficult. You accept this. Staying mostly still preserves warmth anyway. Arms tuck close to the body. Hands find pockets or sleeves. You press feet together, sharing heat even with yourself. Some frontier families slept with mittens on. Others tucked hands into spare socks. Fingers stiffen easily and wake painfully if neglected. Small preparations like this often determined whether mornings began slowly or with sharp discomfort. There was never one agreed method for sleeping dressed. Practices varied by region, by supply, by habit. Some preferred fewer layers and heavier blankets. Others trusted clothing first and bedding second. What mattered was consistency. Changing methods too often invited mistakes. Clothing carries the day into the night. Dust, sweat, smoke, and animal smell linger. Washing is rare in winter. Wet clothes are dangerous. You brush off snow and dirt as best you can before settling, knowing moisture will work against you for hours. This ritual becomes automatic. Shake, brush, check seams. As you lie there, you feel how the weight of clothing grounds you. It presses gently, offering resistance against drafts. The sensation is oddly calming, like being held by something firm and familiar. You breathe slower. Boots near your head or tucked beneath blankets warm slightly from your body heat. This prevents freezing and makes morning easier. Morning is always the hardest part. Anything that softens it is worth the trouble. Children are dressed more carefully than the adults. Extra layers, extra checks. Their sleep is lighter, interrupted by fussing and repositioning. Adults wake to fix a blanket or adjust a sleeve, then lie still again, letting sleep return. You notice how sound changes when ears are covered. Wind dulls, fire pops soften. The world grows quieter. This helps fear fade. Darkness feels less intrusive when noise fades with it. There is a quiet understanding here that clothing is never wasted effort. You might sleep poorly, but you wake functional. You might feel stiff, but you are not numb. That difference matters. As the night deepens, you stop noticing individual garments. They blend into a single layer of protection. You drift, surface drift again. Clothing creases and shifts with each breath, but stays in place. By morning, frost may cling to the edges of coats or hats where breath escaped. You brush it away slowly, grateful that it formed there and not inside your chest. Another small success earned through attention rather than luck. You close your eyes again for a final stretch of rest, wrapped in everything you own that matters. In winter, clothing is not about appearance. It is about staying present long enough to see another sunrise. You learn quickly that warmth is not just about how much you have, but how you arrange yourself within it. Your body becomes an instrument you tune each night. Limbs are not left where they fall. They are placed deliberately folded inward, pressed together, positioned to waste as little heat as possible. You curl slightly, not tight enough to cramp, but enough to reduce surface area. This posture feels instinctive once learned. Children adopt it naturally. Adults relearn it through cold discomfort. Flat, spread-out sleep belongs to warmer places. Here, compactness keeps you functional. Hands are tucked close to the chest or folded into sleeves. Fingers rest against warm skin rather than empty air. Feet pressed together, sometimes crossed at the ankles, sharing what heat they can generate. You notice how quickly toes cool when separated, how slowly they warm again if neglected. Breathing becomes part of the calculation. Slow breaths preserve warmth. Rapid breathing strips it away. You focus without forcing it, letting your chest rise and fall evenly. In the quiet, you can hear others doing the same, a low rhythm that blends with the fire and the wind. People who endured many winters learn to avoid unnecessary movement at night. Turning over too often disturbed carefully arranged layers. Each shift invited cold air inside. You wait longer before moving, now assessing whether discomfort is worth the heat loss. Often, it is not. Some sleepers place small objects like stones or warmed tools near their core before lying down. The warmth faded quickly, but the initial comfort helped muscles relax enough for sleep to begin. Others dismissed the practice as pointless. Results varied. What mattered was what worked for you in your space on that night. There was quiet disagreement even then about the best sleeping posture. Some insisted curling too tightly restricted breathing and circulation. Others believed spreading out invited cold. No universal rule emerged. Instead, people adjusted night by night, responding to weather, health, and exhaustion. You notice how fatigue changes tolerance. On the most exhausting days, sleep comes faster despite the cold. Muscles give in. On lighter days, awareness lingers, making each draft feel sharper. You accept this fluctuation rather than fighting it. Shared sleeping spaces require negotiation. You position yourself so elbows do not jab and knees do not steal blankets. Bodies align like puzzle pieces, each finding a place that offers warmth without tension. This coordination often happens without words, guided by habit and familiarity. When you wake briefly, you do not fully open your eyes. You adjust by touch alone. Blanket edge, shoulder, knee. Each movement is practiced and efficient. This half-sleep state becomes familiar, a place where you function without fully waking. Sound cues help orient you. The fire tells you how much time has passed. Wind patterns signal weather shifts. Silence can mean snow falling thickly outside. You absorb this information without conscious thought, letting it guide whether you adjust posture or remain still. As the night wears on, your body settles into a shape it will likely hold until morning. Muscles relax into the curve. Breathing steadies. Heat stabilizes. This moment is fragile but precious. It means sleep has taken hold. You drift deeper now, carried not by comfort but by balance. The cold is still there. It always is. But for this stretch of time, you've arranged yourself well enough to coexist with it. You do not think of sharing a bed as unusual anymore. Cold reshapes ideas of privacy quickly. When nights grow harsh, warmth matters more than distance. You lie close to others, feeling their presence through layers of fabric and blankets, each body adding a small but meaningful contribution to the heat you all depend on. At first, this closeness feels awkward. Elbows touch, knees bump. Someone shifts and steals a bit of blanket. But over time, bodies learn where to rest without disturbing one another. You find a rhythm. Breathing sinks loosely. Movement slow. Sleep settles in more easily when you're not alone against the cold. People often slept arranged by size and need. Children were placed in the warmest center positions. Adults took the edges, absorbing drafts and shielding smaller bodies. This pattern appears again and again in recollections, not as a rule, but as a quiet instinct shared across families and camps. You notice how shared warmth changes the room. The air feels slightly less sharp. Frost forms more slowly on nearby surfaces. Even the fire seems less urgent, allowed to burn lower, because bodies are doing some of the work. This cooperation between people and flame feels deliberate even if no one ever says it aloud. Sharing space also brings sound. Someone sighs in sleep. Someone coughs softly. A sleeper murmurs lost in dreams shaped by exhaustion. These noises are not disruptive. They reassure you that others are still there, still breathing, still enduring the same night. There are challenges, of course. Illness spreads more easily in close quarters. A fever radiates heat one night and weakness the next. People learn to recognize subtle changes in breathing or movement that signal trouble. Nights are when problems reveal themselves most clearly. Some preferred sleeping back to back, sharing warmth without facing one another. Others curled inward, forming loose clusters. Blankets overlapped in uneven layers passed between bodies without much thought of ownership. What mattered was coverage, not whose quilt was whose. You feel how shared sleeping requires trust. You rely on others not to roll away suddenly, not to pull covers carelessly, not to let the fire die completely while you rest. This trust builds slowly, night after night, reinforced by routine rather than words. Occasionally tensions surface. Someone complains quietly about drafts. Someone resents being stuck near the wall. These moments pass quickly. Cold has a way of smoothing disagreements. Comfort is scarce enough that cooperation feels necessary rather than generous. As sleep deepens, awareness fades. You no longer track where one body ends and another begins. Heat blends, breathing blends. The night becomes a shared experience rather than an individual one. When you wake briefly, you adjust without thinking. A blanket pulled higher. A shoulder shifted closer. These movements happen gently practiced, meant to preserve warmth for everyone. No one fully wakes. The group settles again. By morning, stiffness sets in. Limbs ache from limited space. Yet you rise knowing that shared sleep carried you through another night. Alone, the cold might have won more ground. Together you held it back just enough. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb those still resting. Steam rises faintly from bodies and blankets as they meet cooler air. The night releases its grip reluctantly. This is how winter teaches cooperation. Not through speeches or rules, but through simple necessity. Shared beds, shared breath, shared survival. You stretch carefully, grateful for the quiet warmth that lingered long enough to let sleep do its work. Animals become part of your nights, whether you planned for it or not. You begin to notice how their presence changes the feel of darkness, how sleep settles differently when another living thing breathes nearby. Horses stamp softly outside. Cattle shift their weight. Chickens murmur in uneasy half-sleep. These sounds blend into the background, steady and grounding. You position yourself closer to where animals are kept when you can. A shared wall with a stable holds warmth longer than an exposed one. Even a thin barrier benefits from the heat of large bodies pressed against it. This is not sentiment. It is physics learned through cold nights and stiff mornings. Some people brought animals inside entirely. Calves, goats, dogs. Not out of affection alone, but necessity. Their warmth mattered. Their presence reduced drafts. Their breathing filled the space with life. You grow accustomed to the smell, the occasional movement, the soft sounds that mark time when the fire burns low. Dogs curl close, instinctively conserving heat. They know where the warmest spot is and claim it early. You do not argue. A dog pressed against your legs adds more warmth than an extra blanket ever could. In return, you offer a shared space and a hand that settles on familiar fur when sleep wavers. Horses remain outside more often, but you learn to keep them close. Their bulk breaks the wind. Their presence discourages predators. At night, you listen for changes in their behavior. Restless movement means weather shifting or danger nearby. Calm stillness means the night remains manageable. Livestock sounds provide reassurance. A cow chewing slowly, a horse snorting softly. These noises tell you that life continues beyond your shelter walls. Silence from animals feels wrong. You wake more easily when it stretches too long. People learned early that animals helped regulate temperature indirectly. Warm air rises, heat seeps through shared walls and floors. Even snow drifting differently around animal shelters affects how cold settles overnight. These details are noticed not through theory, but through repeated observation. There was never full agreement on how close was too close. Some worried about hygiene, others accepted the trade-off without hesitation. In winter, priorities narrowed sharply. Cleanliness mattered less than survival. Adjustments were made when weather softened again. You notice how animals influence your own sleep rhythm. Their movements prompt brief waking. Their settling encourages rest. You match their patterns without realizing it. Sleep becomes less about hours and more about cycles. Children often sleep better when animals are nearby. Fear fades when a dog sighs or shifts beside them. Adults feel it too, though they rarely admit it. Loneliness sharpens cold. Company dulls it. As the night deepens, animal heat lingers. Frost forms more slowly near shared walls. The air feels slightly less brittle. You breathe easier knowing you're not entirely alone in this fight against winter. When morning approaches, animals wake first. Shuffling, snorting low sounds ripple outward. These become your alarm. You open your eyes knowing it is time to move to feed to start the fire again. You rise stiff but steady, grateful for the quiet alliance formed overnight. Animals do not understand winter the way you do, but they endure it alongside you. Their presence makes sleep possible in ways no tool ever could. Sound becomes one of your most reliable companions at night. Sight fades quickly after dark, but sound stays sharp, shaped by cold air and open space. You learn to listen without straining, letting noises pass through you, rather than pulling you fully awake. The cabin speaks constantly. Wood contracts as temperatures drop, releasing small pops that echo in the quiet. Nails shift, beams settle. At first these sounds feel like warnings. Later they become familiar markers of normal behavior. You learn which noises belong to the structure and which do not. Wind has many voices. Sometimes it moves low and steady, brushing against walls like hand feeling for cracks. Other times it rises suddenly, rushing across the roof, then disappearing just as quickly. Each pattern tells you something about what the night might bring. A steady wind usually means colder temperatures ahead. Sudden gusts often signal changing weather. Fire adds its own language. A sharp crack means a log shifting. A soft collapse tells you embers are settling. Silence from the fire draws your attention even in sleep. You stir before fully waking, sensing that heat may be fading. Outside sounds carry far. Footsteps crunch loudly on frozen ground. An animal call echoes longer than expected. Even distant movement feels close. This heightened clarity keeps you alert without demanding constant vigilance. You rest while remaining aware. Snow alters everything. When it begins to fall heavily, sound dulls, wind softens. The world feels wrapped in cloth. This quiet can be calming or unsettling depending on experience. Those who learned winter well often welcomed it. Snow meant insulation. Snow meant less wind. Snow meant the cold might hold steady rather than worsen. You notice how your own sounds change. Breathing feels louder in the stillness. A cough seems disruptive. You learn to move quietly, not out of fear, but efficiency. Wasted movement wastes warmth. Shared shelters amplify sound. A sleeper shifting blankets. Someone sighing deeply. A quiet murmur from a dream. These noises reassure you that others remain present. Silence from people feels heavier than silence from the land. Some nights bring unexpected noises. Ice forming in a water container, frost cracking along a wall. These sounds can startle you awake until you recognize them. Experience teaches discernment. Not every unfamiliar sound means danger. People relied on sound to monitor conditions long before they had tools to measure them. Changes in wind pitch, animal behavior, or fire noise guided decisions without conscious thought. You absorb this knowledge simply by lying still, and listening. As sleep deepens, sounds blend together. Wind, fire, breathing wood. They form a low, steady background that carries you forward. You float on it, waking briefly when something changes, then sinking again when balance returns. By morning, you realize how much information you gathered without effort. Sound guided you through the night, letting sleep remain possible without sacrificing awareness. You lie still a moment longer, listening as the first signs of dawn creep in. The cabin settles one last time. Outside, the world stirs. Another night has passed, carried on sound and silence working together. Fear visits most clearly after midnight when the fire burns lowest, and the mind has room to wander. You feel it arrive quietly, not as panic, but as a tightening in the chest, a sense that the darkness is paying attention. Winter nights have a way of doing that. They stretch long enough for thoughts to grow heavy. You learn not to fight this feeling directly. Struggling only sharpens it. Instead, you narrow your focus. You count breaths without exaggerating them. You notice the weight of blankets on your legs. You listen for familiar sounds. These small anchors pull your attention back into your body where it belongs. People who survived many winters often spoke about fear as something to manage rather than eliminate. Calm was not a personality trait. It was a practiced response. Panic burned energy. Panic tightened muscles and quickened breathing, pulling warmth away from hands and feet where it was needed most. This understanding spread quietly passed along through example rather than explanation. You remind yourself of what you know. The shelter is holding. The fire still glows faintly. Others nearby are breathing steadily. The wind outside has not changed its tone. These observations matter. They separate imagined danger from real threat. Night amplifies memory. Old worries surface easily. Regrets. Unfinished plans. Thoughts drift toward people far away or winters past. You let these thoughts pass without following them too far. Following them leads away from rest. Letting them drift keeps you grounded. Children sense fear quickly. A restless shift. A whispered question. Adults respond with touch rather than words. A hand placed gently. A blanket pulled higher. These gestures carry reassurance more effectively than explanation ever could. Some nights bring unfamiliar sounds that test your composure. A sudden crack from freezing wood, snow sliding off a roof, an animal moving close to the wall. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. Heart quickens, muscles tense, then you listen again. The sound does not repeat. You release the tension slowly. You learn the value of routine in moments like this. Familiar actions create stability. Adjust the blanket edge. Press your feet together. Rest your hand where warmth gathers. These movements signal safety to your nervous system, even when logic feels distant. There is no shame in fear here. Everyone feels it. Those who deny it often struggle more. Acknowledging it quietly allows it to fade. Ignoring it lets it linger. As exhaustion deepens, fear loses its sharpness. It softens into vigilance rather than alarm. You remain aware without being overwhelmed. This balance allows sleep to return in small portions. You drift-wake briefly, then drift again. Each return to sleep feels like a small victory. Winter teaches patience in this way. Rest is earned gradually, not all at once. Toward morning, fear retreats with the darkness. Light changes the tone of the world even before it's visible. Sounds shift. The fire feels less critical. Your breathing slows naturally. You lie still a moment longer, letting the night release you gently. Fear did not vanish, but it did not win either. You managed it the way people here learn to manage many things. Quietly, carefully, one breath at a time. Illness announces itself subtly at first. A soreness that lingers longer than expected. A chill that settles deeper than the others. You notice these changes at night when the body has no distractions. Cold magnifies weakness, turning small problems into serious ones if ignored. You wake aware of your own breathing. It feels heavier. Each inhale demands more effort. You shift carefully, knowing that exertion costs warmth you cannot spare. In winter, energy becomes currency. You spend it cautiously. People here learn to recognize when exhaustion crossed into danger. Too much sleepiness could be as threatening as too little. Someone who could not wake easily to tend the fire raised quiet concern. Someone whose hands shook when reaching for a blanket drew watchful eyes. Care happened without ceremony, extra layers added, food saved, fire tended more carefully. Night reveals illness faster than day ever could. Fever makes cold feel strange rather than sharp. Chills arrive in waves. You pull covers tighter, then loosen them moments later as heat rises unexpectedly. This restless pattern keeps sleep light and broken. Those nearby adjust around you. Someone stays closer, someone checks the fire more often. Someone listens a little harder for changes in breathing. These acts rarely come with discussion. They happen because everyone understands how quickly winter punishes neglect. Cold and sickness work together. A mild illness that might pass easily in warmer months becomes dangerous when paired with freezing temperatures. Rest becomes treatment. Warmth becomes medicine. People who could not rest often did not recover. You notice how quiet the shelter grows when someone is unwell. Movement slows, voices drop. Even animals seem calmer. The night feels heavier as if everyone is holding their breath together. Herbal remedies and home treatments appear quietly. Warm liquids, steams when possible. Poultices prepared with whatever knowledge is available. Results vary. Sometimes they help, sometimes they do little. What always matters is patience and warmth. There was no shared certainty about what caused illness. Cold dampness, fatigue, and bad air were all suspected. Explanations differed, but responses often look the same. Keep the person warm, keep them fed, keep them resting. Sleep comes and goes in shorter stretches. You drift wake coughing or shivering, then settle again when comfort returns. Each cycle feels longer than it is. Time stretches at night. By morning, stiffness sets in more deeply. Getting up takes effort. You move slowly, careful not to waste strength. Others notice and adjust expectations without comment. Work can wait. Survival cannot. You lie back briefly, letting warmth gather again before facing the day. Illness has not taken you yet. The night did not finish its work. That knowledge steadies you. Winter sleep is never guaranteed. It is negotiated, especially when the body falters. You learn to listen closely to respond early to rest when rest is offered. These habits matter more than courage. As light grows, you prepare to rise. The night has tested you differently this time, reminding you how thin the line can be. You step carefully across it, grateful for another morning, carrying the lesson forward into the next cold evening. Storm nights announce themselves long before sleep begins. The air feels heavier. Wind presses harder against walls. Snow carries a sharper edge. You sense it as you prepare, knowing the night will not pass quietly. These are the nights that test routines and patience alike. You secure what you can before lying down. Doors are checked. Blankets are pulled closer to walls. The fire is built more carefully, favoring a deep bed of coals rather than tall flames. You want steadiness, not brightness. You want heat that lasts. As the storm strengthens, sound changes first. Wind no longer moves around the shelter. It hits it directly. Gusts arrive in waves, each one stronger than the last. Snow rattles against walls and roof, sometimes sliding down in heavy sheets that thump and then vanish into silence. Sleep comes in short intervals. You drift, then wake to listen. Is the fire still alive? Is the roof holding? Has the wind shifted? Each question rises and falls without fully forming into panic. You answer them with quiet checks rather than anxious thoughts. People learned quickly that storm nights required shared awareness. Someone wakes to tend the fire. Someone else listens for changes in the roof or walls. These roles rotate naturally. No one stays fully asleep for long. Rest is taken in turns. Inside warmth gathers unevenly. Drafts appear where none existed before. Snow piled against walls adds insulation in some places, while forcing cold air through gaps in others. You adjust blankets again and again, responding to the shelter as it responds to the storm. Time stretches. Minutes feel longer. You lose track of hours. The darkness feels deeper, pressed down by clouds and blowing snow. Outside landmarks disappear entirely. Inside the world shrinks to firelight and breathing. Storms bring their own fears. Roof collapse, fire dying, drifts blocking exits. These thoughts surface quietly and are set aside just as quietly. Worry does not fix problems. Attention does. Children sleep more fitfully on these nights. Adults wake to calm them, offering warmth and steady presence. Words are minimal. Touch does the work. At some point the storm reaches its peak. Wind roars without pause. The shelter shudders but holds. You stay very still, conserving heat, trusting the preparations you made earlier. Then gradually the sound changes again. Gusts lengthen, snow lightens, the pressure eases. You do not notice immediately. Sleep finally deepens, pulled by exhaustion rather than comfort. When morning arrives, it comes slowly. Light filters through gaps dulled by snow. The world outside feels transformed. Drifts reshape familiar paths. The air is painfully cold but still. You re-stiff and careful, grateful that the shelter held through the worst of it. Storm nights leave a residue of fatigue that lasts all day. Yet they also reinforce confidence. You endured. You adapted. As you step back inside to warm yourself again, you know that future storms will come. But now you have felt one fully and survived it. That knowledge settles quietly, ready to be drawn on when the next long night arrives. Morning is the most dangerous part of winter, even though it looks harmless at first. You wake slowly, body stiff, mind fogged, and the cold feels sharper now than it did during the night. Stillness kept heat in. Movement threatens to release it all at once. You do not rise immediately. You lie still and test small motions first. Fingers wiggle inside sleeves. Toes press together beneath layers. You wait for sensation to return evenly before committing to more. People who rushed mornings paid for it with clumsiness, strained muscles, or a sudden drop in body temperature that lingered all day. Getting up becomes a sequence rather than a single act. Sit, pause, breathe, swing legs down, pause again. The floor steals warmth instantly. You slip feet into boots or shoes kept close overnight, grateful they bend instead of cracking. Frozen footwear can delay a day before it even begins. The fire is your first destination. You coax it back, gently feeding embers rather than starting from scratch when possible. Flames flare briefly, then settle. Warmth spreads unevenly, first to hands, then to face. This moment feels essential. Without it, nothing else works well. Mornings demand fuel. Cold burns calories without asking. You eat even when appetite lags. Something warm if possible. Something dense if not. Food taken early helps the body generate heat before the day pulls energy away again. You notice how conversation stays minimal at this hour. Voices are low. Movements are deliberate. Everyone saves effort. The day will ask enough without spending energy too soon. Children are guided gently through this process. Layers checked. Hands warmed. Faces covered before stepping outside. Patience here prevents trouble later. Adults move slower too, though they pretend otherwise. Outside, the world feels brittle. Snow squeaks underfoot. Breath clouds thickly. Tasks take longer. Tools feel heavier. You pace yourself, knowing that exhaustion carries into the night ahead. As the sun rises, the cold loosens slightly, but never fully. Shadows hold frost long after light touches them. You learn where warmth lingers and where it disappears quickly. This knowledge shapes where you stand, where you rest, where you work. By mid-morning, your body adjusts. Movement generates heat. Stiffness fades. You feel capable again. Yet you remember the morning carefully. It reminds you that sleep and waking are not opposites here. They are connected parts of the same survival rhythm. As evening approaches later, you will prepare again with this knowledge fresh in mind. Winter teaches through repetition. Each morning reinforces what the night demanded. You carry that lesson quietly already, thinking ahead to the next time darkness settles, and sleep must be negotiated once more. Children experience winter nights differently, and you notice it as soon as you lie down beside them. Their bodies cool faster, their sleep is lighter. Small movements ripple through blankets as they shift, seeking warmth, without knowing quite how to ask for it. You adjust around them instinctively, tucking edges, adding layers, creating a pocket of heat that holds. They learn early that night is something to prepare for. Boots are placed carefully, coats are shaken dry. Wet mittens are set close to the fire, not touching, just near enough to soften by morning. These routines become as natural as brushing teeth might be in another time. When children wake from the cold, it is rarely dramatic. A quiet whimper, a restless turn, an arm reaching out. Adults respond immediately, even half asleep. A blanket is pulled higher. A small body is drawn closer. Warmth is shared without comment. Stories are told softly before sleep, not to entertain so much as to calm. Familiar tales, slow breathing, and steady racing thoughts. Fear fades more easily when the mind is occupied with something known. These stories often repeat night after night. Repetition is comforting, variation is unnecessary. You notice how children sleep deeper once settled. Their breathing evens out. Limbs relax. Exhaustion helps them surrender to rest more fully than adults often can. Yet they wake more easily, too sensitive to changes in temperature or sound. During illness or storms, children are watched more closely. Their small size leaves less margin for error. Extra layers are added. Fire is tended more carefully. Adults take colder spots without hesitation. This quiet exchange of comfort happens without discussion. It is understood. Morning brings its own challenges. Children wake stiff and slow, reluctant to leave warmth behind. You guide them patiently. Gloves are found. Scarves are wrapped. Faces are covered before stepping into the cold. Small acts prevent larger problems later. Winter teaches children resilience without explanation. They learn by watching. They learn by feeling. Nights like these shape habits that last far beyond the season itself. As you settle again for rest, you listen to their breathing and feel the shared warmth steady the space. Protecting them sharpens your attention, but it also deepens your sense of purpose. Sleep comes more easily when you know why you are enduring the cold. Women's nights unfold differently, though the cold does not discriminate. You notice how rest is shaped by responsibility rather than by opportunity. Sleep comes in pieces interrupted by tending, checking, adjusting. Even when exhaustion weighs heavily, awareness never fully disappears. Before settling tasks linger. A tear in a blanket needs stitching before it worsens. Clothing must be repositioned so it will dry by morning. Food for the next day is planned. Quietly, ingredients moved closer to warmth so they do not freeze solid overnight. These preparations steal minutes from rest, yet they protect it later. You lie down last more often than not. By the time you settle, the fire has already changed shape. Others breathe deeply, having slipped into sleep sooner. You adjust around them, careful not to disturb the fragile balance of warmth and stillness. Hands remain alert even in rest. You feel for cold spots without opening your eyes. A child's foot uncovered. A draft creeping in from a wall seam, a blanket slipping lower than it should. These corrections happen automatically, practiced through repetition rather than instruction. Sleep here is lighter shaped by listening rather than dreaming. You wake to small sounds others might miss, a change in breathing, a cough, a shift that suggests discomfort. Responding early prevents longer wakefulness later. During storms or illness, rest becomes even more fragmented. You stay half aware through the night, gauging when to intervene and when to let sleep continue. This balance is learned slowly. Too much vigilance drains energy. Too little invites trouble. There's little recognition for this work. It blends into the background, assumed rather than noted. Yet the difference it makes shows in the morning. Fewer frozen hands, fewer tears, a steadier start to the day. You notice how fatigue settles deeper here, not sharp, but constant. It hums beneath everything. Yet there is also familiarity in the routine. Knowing what needs attention reduces uncertainty. Predictability softens stress. When sleep does come, it is shallow but restorative in its own way. You drift knowing that even rest broken into pieces still counts. The body gathers what it can. As morning nears, you wake before others. The fire is stirred first. Warmth is coaxed back gently. Quiet movements prepare the space for waking without shock. You stretch carefully, joints stiff but functional. Another night navigated. Another set of small decisions that kept everyone warm enough to continue. This is how winter nights pass here. Not through uninterrupted rest, but through constant care woven so tightly into routine that it almost disappears. You settle back briefly, letting warmth gather again, ready to rise when the rest of the shelter begins to stir. Nights alone feel different the moment the door closes behind you. Sound sharpens. Space feels larger even inside a small shelter. Without another body nearby, the cold seems more personal, pressing in from all sides. You notice it in the way your shoulders tense and your breathing grows more deliberate. You prepare more carefully when sleeping alone. Extra layers are pulled close. Blankets are arranged with precision. The fire is banked just a little higher than usual. There is no shared warmth to rely on. Everything must come from your own planning. Silence behaves differently without company. Each sound stands alone. Wind against the wall. Wood settling. A distant animal call. Without other breathing to blend with these noises, feel closer. You learn to let them pass without attaching meaning too quickly. Fear tests you more sharply here. Without reassurance from others, thoughts wander easily. You counter them with routine. Check the fire, adjust the door, count breaths. Familiar actions steady the mind better than logic ever could. You notice how posture changes when alone. You curl tighter, limbs press inward. Blankets are wrapped more completely around you. This cocooning is instinctive, a response to the absence of shared heat. Sleep comes slower. You wake more often. Each waking feels more complete, less partial. Yet over time, even solitude develops a rhythm. You learn which sounds repeat harmlessly and which require attention. Animals become more important on these nights. A dog nearby anchors you. Horses shifting outside reassure you that the world continues beyond your shelter. Even distant sounds feel less threatening when they follow expected patterns. Morning arrives more slowly. Without others stirring time stretches, you rise carefully, aware that no one will notice if you move poorly or waste energy. Self-reliance sharpens attention. Sleeping alone teaches a different kind of resilience. It strips away shared comfort and leaves only habit and awareness. Yet it also builds confidence. Each night endured, alone proves capability. As you prepare for the next night, you carry this knowledge with you. Whether alone or surrounded by others, the lessons remain. Winter does not change. Only your response does. Food changes how the night feels long before you lie down. You notice it in the quiet warmth that settles into your core, the way cold seems slightly less aggressive when your body has something to work with. Eating before sleep is not indulgence here. It is preparation. You choose what to eat carefully. Heavy foods sit longer and release warmth slowly. Stews thick with beans or grain. Salted meat chewed thoroughly. Bread dense enough to feel substantial in the stomach. Even when appetite is low, you eat anyway, knowing hunger wakes you colder than discomfort ever could. Warm drinks matter too, not because they stay warm long, but because they begin the process. Heat moves inward, loosening muscles and encouraging stillness. You sip slowly, letting steam rise toward your face, warming skin and breath at the same time. People learned early that going to bed hungry made the night harder. Sleep broke more often. Shivering set in sooner. Morning weakness lingered longer. These lessons spread quietly, reinforced by nights that went badly, rather than advice offered freely. You notice how timing matters. Eating too early leaves you cold again by midnight. Eating too late makes lying down uncomfortable. There's a narrow window where food supports sleep instead of disrupting it. You learn to aim for it without measuring clocks, guided by fading light and routine. Children are fed again before bed even if they ate earlier. A small portion. Something warm if possible. This extra step reduces waking later and keeps small bodies steadier through the coldest hours. During shortages, food before sleep becomes a difficult decision. Save it for morning work or spend it now to make the night survivable. Choices like this weigh heavily. Some nights you eat less than you want and feel the difference immediately. Sleep stays shallow, cold creeps closer. There are nights when food is scarce enough that people try to distract themselves from hunger before bed. Stories last longer. Fires are watched more closely. Movement is minimized. Hunger sharpens awareness in ways that are not always helpful. You notice how digestion creates warmth from within. Hands warm slightly, breathing deepens, muscles loosen. This internal heat feels different from fire warmth. It lasts longer and spreads more evenly. It allows you to settle without constant adjustment. Morning reveals the impact clearly. Nights preceded by good meals end with steadier waking, less stiffness, more energy. Nights without leave a residue of fatigue that no amount of morning fire fully erases. Food also shapes dreams. Heavy meals bring deeper rest for some, restless turning for others. People learn their own responses over time and adjust accordingly. Winter encourages this kind of self-observation. As you lie down, stomach gently full, you feel better equipped. The cold remains, but you have given your body one more tool to meet it. You breathe slower. The night feels less sharp. You drift, knowing that survival here is built from small choices layered carefully together. Shelter, fire, bedding, clothing, food. Each one alone is insufficient. Together they carry you through. You begin to notice how winter changes depending on where you are. The cold does not feel the same everywhere, and neither does sleep. On the plains, wind dominates everything. It never truly stops. Even at night it prowls, flattening grass, slipping through cracks, testing every layer you rely on. Sleep there is shaped by sound and movement, by the constant presence of air in motion. In the mountains, the cold behaves differently. Wind still matters, but weight matters more. Snow piles deep and heavy, pressing against roofs, muting sound. Nights feel quieter, almost sealed. You sleep listening for creaks that suggest strain rather than drafts that steal heat. The cold feels denser, more settled, less restless. Desert winters surprise those who have not experienced them. Days may hold warmth, but nights drop sharply. Heat escapes quickly into open sky. You prepare for sleep while the memory of daylight still lingers on your skin, only to feel it vanish once darkness settles. Shelters here rely on mass rather than fuel. Thick walls and earth hold what little warmth the day provided. Forested regions offer different advantages. Trees break wind and provide fuel. Cabins feel more stable. Fires burn more freely. Yet snow clings to branches and falls suddenly, sometimes shaking shelters awake in the night. Sleep includes listening upward as much as outward. You adjust habits depending on place. On the plains you bank fires carefully and block wind relentlessly. In the mountains you watch roofs and clear snow when possible. In desert regions you insulate heavily and prepare for rapid temperature loss after sunset. People travelling between regions often struggled at first. Habits learned in one place failed in another. Bedding that worked on the plains felt insufficient in high elevations. Fire routines that suited forests wasted precious fuel where wood was scarce. Experience forced adaptation. Animals behave differently too. Livestock bunch closer in open country. In forests they spread slightly sheltered by trees. Their sounds change. Their presence shifts how you sleep and what you listen for. Children notice these differences quickly. They comment on sound, on darkness, on how the cold feels sharper or duller. Adults absorb the changes, more quietly adjusting without discussion. As you settle each night, location shapes expectation. You prepare differently even when the actions look similar. The cold teaches you that no single solution works everywhere. Sleep is local. Survival is specific. You drift off carrying this understanding, knowing that winter demands attention not just to time but to place. Each night teaches you something new about where you are and how to endure it. You hear the stories most often at night when the fire is low and the mind drifts toward what might have been. Someone mentions a man who slept too close to the wall and never quite warmed again. Someone else recalls a family who trusted a thin shelter, one winter too many. These stories are not told for drama. They are reminders passed gently so lessons do not need to be relearned the hard way. Failure here is rarely sudden. It creeps in quietly, a blanket left damp too often, a fire banked too low on the wrong night, a body pushed past exhaustion because stopping felt inconvenient. Sleep is where these small choices reveal their consequences. You learn to listen to these stories without fear, letting them sharpen awareness rather than steal rest. They serve as guides. Do not sleep with wet clothes. Do not ignore shivering. Do not assume tomorrow will be kinder than tonight. Some nights you wake remembering a detail someone mentioned weeks earlier, a trick for blocking a draft, a way to arrange bedding that worked better in deep cold. These memories surface when needed, shaped by necessity rather than intention. People who survived longest were not always the strongest or the bravest. They were often the most observant. They noticed patterns. They adjusted early. They treated sleep as something active, something to manage rather than expect. You think about how easily small mistakes compound. One poor night leads to fatigue. Fatigue leads to slower reactions. Slower reactions invite further mistakes. Breaking that chain matters. Sometimes it means stopping early. Sometimes it means eating more than planned. Sometimes it means admitting discomfort before it becomes danger. As you lie there, you review your own habits quietly. Are your feet warm enough? Is the fire steady? Are drafts blocked? This review calms rather than alarms. It gives the mind something useful to do. You notice how experience reshapes fear. Early on, fear was loud and unfocused. Now it feels narrower, more precise. It points to specific actions rather than vague worry. This kind of fear is manageable. Sleep comes easier when lessons have been learned. You trust your adjustments. You trust the shelter. You trust yourself a little more than you did before. By morning, the stories fade again, returning to the background where they belong. They have done their work. Another night passed without repeating old errors. You stretch slowly, feeling the stiffness that marks effort rather than failure. The night tested you, but you responded with attention and care. That response matters more than luck. As evening approaches again later, these lessons will surface once more, guiding preparation quietly. Winter does not forgive carelessness, but it rewards learning. And each night you sleep a little wiser than before. By now your nights follow patterns you no longer question. Small rituals repeat themselves without thought, smoothing the transition from day into darkness. You check the same places. You arrange the same layers. You move in the same order. These habits do not feel restrictive. They feel protective. You notice how certain actions signal the body that rest is coming. Shaking snow from boots, laying gloves near the fire, folding blankets in a familiar way. Each step tells your mind that preparation is complete, that it is safe to slow down. People who lived through long winters depended on these routines more than they realized at the time. Without clocks or artificial light, consistency replaced precision. Night arrived when it arrived. Sleep followed when conditions allowed. Habit bridged the uncertainty. You feel the effect immediately. Breathing deepens sooner. Muscles relax with less resistance. Even fear quiets faster when the same sequence unfolds each night. Familiarity reduces effort. Reduced effort preserves warmth. Routines also prevent mistakes. You're less likely to forget a drafty corner when you check it automatically. Less likely to misplace a tool needed during the night. Less likely to leave food exposed to freezing. Repetition catches errors before they matter. Children mirror these habits quickly. They reach for blankets at the same time each night. They settle into sleep faster when the pattern holds. Disruptions unsettle them more than cold itself. You notice how these routines change slightly with weather. On calmer nights, steps shorten. On harsher ones, they expand. Extra checks, extra layers, extra care with fire. The structure stays the same even when details shift. Sleep deepens because your mind is not inventing new decisions each night. Energy is conserved. Attention narrows to what matters. This efficiency makes rest possible even when conditions